You are now listening to The Forefront Radio, where we discuss history, the Bible, the history of the Israelites, science, and other matters. Bring it out. The history of the blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans as it relates to the Bible. Who were you prior to slavery? Who were you prior to colonization? These answers and more can be seen and heard as you listen to The Forefront Radio.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to The Forefront Radio. I am your host, Afiel Levi. At this time, we're going to go ahead and go into discussing today's topic. But before we do, I'd like to ask all the new listeners and new viewers of The Forefront Radio to like, share, and subscribe to this content, so every time we have a live or anytime we have an update for an episode, you would surely be able to attain that information that is vital to our beloved listeners. The Forefront Radio started in 2020 of 2000 of 2 years ago, before the pandemic rather, and the stated goal was to increase information towards the diaspora and inform others about who were you prior to slavery, who were you prior to colonization. We talk about a lot of social issues, news, biblical topics, and this discussion will be about the singer R. Kelly, who faces 30 years in prison. But before we do, I'd like to go into a little bit of history, so let's touch on some history briefly. that we will show soon of the last surviving U.S. slave ship. And this information can be found through the Associated Press. So we're going to share the screen so you'll be able to view this information as we go.
Last surviving U.S. slave shipwreck on Alabama coast. The remaining parts of the final U.S. slave ship, which was wrecked by a hurricane off the coast of Alabama more than 150 years ago, have been unearthed by researchers researching the debris, which has been buried in mud since it sank in 1860. Maritime archaeologist James Delgado of Search Inc. in Florida says that the lower deck of the two-masted Clotilda, where the seized Africans and stocks were stored, is still completely intact despite being submerged for decades in a river area that hasn't been dredged. Decades after the ship sank, a bulkhead was added to create a slave cage where individuals were imprisoned as cargo for weeks, raising issues about whether food and drink containers, chains, and even human DNA may be found in the hull, Delgado said. Delgado believes the finding elevates the Clotilda's research worth and distinguishes the ship's wreckage from all others. This was validated in a report submitted to the Associated Press, which resulted in the National Register of Historic Places designation for the site. According to sixth-generation Charlie Lewis hostage Joycelyn Davis, a vice president of the Clotilde Descendants Association, the tale of what occurred more than 160 years ago should be recounted via the individuals who were engaged rather than a drowned ship. African slaves were last known to be transported to the American South on the Clotilda. People were bought and sold on a boat that was nearly 90 feet long when it left Mobile, Alabama, in 1808, long after Congress banned the practice.
So even though the practice was banned in the United States, many of these states all throughout the 13 colonies were still participating in the slave trade. And there's a misconception. When they talk about slavery, they always leave out the fact that they knew the tribal groups of individuals that were taken. They always refer to it as Africans, but we have to understand that the continent of Africa has several different tribe groups of people. It is 54 countries. So imagine the United States, how it is right now with its multiculturalism and different groups. The same thing with Africa times 54. Okay, so this will tell you that it's not just the continent in itself that we have to regard, but the groups of people within the continent. They knew that historically speaking, these lost tribes came from the bloodline descendants of Jacob, surnamed Israel. The United States of America, a quote, new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men were created equal, was falsified due to the fact it began as a slave society. What many call an original sin, slavery has left an indelible imprint on the nation's persona. A terrible price had to be paid in a tragic, calamitous civil war before this new democracy could be rid of the most undemocratic institution. But for so-called Black Americans, the end of slavery was just the beginning of a quest for equality and equity in a world full of violence, oppression, and domestic terrorism. Now, about millions of Americans, recognizably of so-called African descent, languish in society's backwaters, slums, ghettos, the last hired, the first fired, and we know for a certainty that the biblical teachings show that prophecy and history coincide. These individuals that were placed on slave ships are the lost tribes of the nation of Israel. And we'll go into that scripture in a moment. We'll read it, Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 68, and it reads, Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 68 is one of the generational curses that happened to the children of Israel. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, with ships. Egypt is a state of bondage or captivity or slavery. So the Most High said that the disobedience of the children of Israel would lead to them being sold on captivity or slavery on slave ships. By the way, whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again, meaning they would not see their homeland in Northeast Africa, aka Jerusalem. And there you shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. No one was to redeem the slave man and slave woman that was taken to North America, South America, the Caribbean islands, the UK, within the transatlantic slave trade, the trans-Pacific slave trade, the trans-Saharan slave trade, the trans-Indian slave trade, the trans-China slave trade. This happened on a global level, so definitely this would be documented in the Bible.
A rich businessman whose heirs are still prominent in Mobile had paid for the ship's transoceanic trip. Once in Alabama, the captain of the Clotilda disembarked his human cargo and set fire to the ship, hoping to destroy any record of their expedition.
So a lot of times when it comes to criminal activities, there is no statute of limitations on human rights violations. So the best thing they could try to do is hide the evidence. Hide the evidence.
However, the majority of the ship stayed submerged in the river, untouched by the blaze. Clotilda's debris has been visible on nautical maps since the 1950s, but was officially recognized in 2019 as belonging to the ship, Delgado added. It's possible that more work scheduled for the site in early 2022 may reveal what's hidden within the hull, according to Delgado. Some have speculated that the ship may be exhumed and placed on display, but additional research is required to confirm this. A few miles north of Mobile, in the wake of the South's defeat in the Civil War, enslaved Africans carried to the United States aboard the Clotilda.
All right, folks, that was the first clip that we shared in regards to the last surviving slave ship that we know of within the United States of America. We also have another one based on the Associated Press, which is a shipwreck which holds the key to many of the kin associated with enslaved so-called Africans in the continent of Africa. These are the Israelites of the scriptures.
The wooden wreck of Clotilda lies on a bank in anywhere from 6 to 10 feet of water, on its side a bit, open, broken, burned, and yet still intact, and so intact, at least as an archaeological site, that it is the best preserved example of the many thousands of slave ships that brought people from Africa to the Americas.
When I think about the ship, I think about what those enslaved Africans went through on that ship. So, I'm kind of two-sided. It's like, what would this do for the community? Is there some type of economic growth if this becomes like, a tourist attraction with the artifacts? People can come and look at it. If they build another museum, if they build a replica, how can it benefit the community?
So this can benefit the Black community because they will know that the history of your people stems from biblical prophecy, as well as history and obviously archaeological evidence, okay? Because many people are claiming now, with all these various movements that you have, like ADOS, FBA, and various other movements within the so-called Black diaspora, Black community, they are stating nowadays, which is erroneous to me, that some Blacks have not even come on slave ships, which doesn't make any sense when there are shipping manifestos, archaeological evidence, and literal boats found in the waters. So there's a region in the area of Mobile, Alabama called Africatown. Many experts have determined what can be done with the ship. This Clotilda descendants could have a variety of options to consider for the area called Africatown. This information is important because a lot of people really want to try to neglect or forget the atrocities that happened, the human rights violations that transpired in the United States of America, in Mexico, in Canada, in South Africa, in South America, in the Caribbean islands, in the UK. This was a global event, and the God of the universe could not have just simply disregarded this global event that impacted all of creation. Okay, this is why it's documented that the children of Israel lose their identity, that they would be scattered all throughout the world, and they would go through slave ships. The eminent Negro man, known as W.E.B. Du Bois, predicted in 1903 that the issue of the 20th century would be the problem of the, quote, color line. He has been proven right time and time again. At the mid-century, the astute Swedish observer of American affairs, Gunnar Myrdal, reiterated the point, declaring the race problem to be our great national dilemma, fretting about the threat it posed to the success of a democratic experiment. So consider the fact that even to this day, you have situations of domestic terrorism where people that just want to be left alone, people that are innocent of anything, will have an individual such as the Buffalo shooter that will walk into a grocery store and with an assault rifle marked, "Here are your reparations," go in and assassinate innocent police officers that were retired, innocent grandmothers, innocent people. And it's just unfortunate that many people are blind to the fact that this fits biblical prophecy.
Shipwrecks, particularly shipwrecks with powerful stories and meaning for a community like Clotilda, inspire all sorts of ideas and desires. And as to what is doable really depends on what the hard science says can be done that doesn't destroy it.
Alrighty, folks, that was a clip from the Associated Press. So now we are going to go into some recent current events and current news, and then we'll touch on the R. Kelly situation. Forefront Radio, and you're a new listener, I would please ask that you like, comment, share, and subscribe to this content so that way you can have updates whenever we do post it. Recently, the singer R. Kelly was sentenced to about 30 years in prison, and we'll touch on that article in just a moment. But before we do, let's touch briefly on a few current events that have happened recently, including the Putin situation and the war in Ukraine. Putin still wants most of Ukraine. War outlook is grim, U.S. intelligence chief. Washington Reuters. Russian President Vladimir Putin still wants to take most of Ukraine, and the pictures of the war there remains pretty grim, the top U.S. intelligence official said on Tuesday. That's a picture of the current president, President Vladimir Putin, at a Caspian summit. It says, "We continue to be in position where we look at President Putin and we think he has effectively the same political goals that we had previously, which is to say that he wants to take most of Ukraine. The U.S. Director of National Intelligence told a Commerce Department conference. Okay, so we know based on the scriptures that the scriptures tells us that there shall be wars and rumors of wars, that there shall be wars and rumors of wars. This is in the book of Matthew, chapter 24. These are signs indicating that the frequency of many of the things that are happening throughout the world will increase more and more over time. For example, you had World War I that transpired, World War II, the Civil War, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, and many major conflicts that the United States had setting up its global empire. And then you have other Edomite nations, such as Russia, such as France, such as Spain, such as Portugal, such as the UK, that has infiltrated all throughout the world to spread its tenets of Western culture. And many people don't realize that these things have brought about many of the atrocities that we see on the earth today. So that was the first article. Putin still wants to get into Ukraine. All right. So now the next article that we will touch on for this particular segment will be the LA County situation, where a man had his beach property restored to him. So let's touch on that briefly. LA County returns 21 million beach property taken from Black family in 1929. Okay, this was posted about an hour ago by Doug Cunningham. Let's touch on it briefly. June 29th, almost a century after it was taken, Los Angeles County beach land worth $21 million was returned Tuesday to descendants of its Black owners. The town of Manhattan Beach took the land from Charles and Willa Bruce in 1929. So now this person was a legitimate doctor. This person had a $21 million worth beachfront property, and he wasn't able to attain it because the government stole it under the claim of eminent domain, right? I think they, according to what I remember, if I remember the story correctly, because we covered several different stories associated with the same similar situation, the mayor of the city took it, renamed that place after himself, created a park after himself, and then years later, now they're, let's go ahead and give it back to you. Cap, all cap. This is Bible prophecy. Redlining, having your houses burned down, having your property stolen from you when you legitimately purchased it. This is not the land of freedom for the children of Israel. We suffer from generational curses, and those that don't have our best interests at heart always show their nasty head and show the form of European insecurity, also known as white supremacy. It says the LA County Board of Supervisors unanimously approved the return of Bruce's Beach to the great-grandsons of Charles and Willa Bruce, CNN and the New York Times reported. The land was taken from the original Black owners. So now this phrase right here should be changed. It wasn't taken. It was stolen. It was stolen property. The land was stolen from the original Black owners through eminent domain condemnation proceedings in 1924. This is a day we weren't sure would ever come. The return of our family's property happened thanks to the hard work of many, many people. It means the world to us, and we know how important this is to people across the country. But it is also bittersweet, Anthony Bruce said in a statement. He said his great-grandparents, Willa and Charles Bruce, sacrificed to open a business that gave Black people a place to gather and socialize. He said the town of Manhattan Beach stole it or took it from them because of the color of their skin, and it destroyed them financially. So now think about all the other Black communities, such as Rosewood, such as Greenwood, also known as Tulsa, Oklahoma, also known as the region that happened in Central Park. Many Black cities all throughout the United States were sunk to the ground, were bombed, and these were all acts of terrorism where they rioted and massacred and killed people 30 against 1. That was the ratio. Men, women, and children were shot, killed, lynched, burned alive, had their properties confiscated during a period of time known as the Red Summer, and throughout the United States, even to this day. Now it's more covertly with the redlining, housing discrimination, and things of that nature. But we know for a fact that we suffer from the generational curses of Deuteronomy 28. For example, Deuteronomy chapter 28, and I believe the verse is verse 30. We're going to read it shortly. Goes into this very point that we're talking about. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 30 is the prophecy. We call it history. The Bible calls it prophecy. Okay. This is the prophecy that the children of Israel would have homes and houses that they build, but they will not dwell therein. Watch this. Deuteronomy 28, verse 30, thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. Did this happen during slavery? Yes, it did. Thou shalt build a house, and thou shalt not dwell therein. So many of the Black people, included those that built the White House, built the Capitol buildings, built the United States of America with their blood, sweat, and tears. They built homes, they built Capitol buildings, they built churches, they built everything that you see with their own two hands, but they were not able to dwell therein. They built the railroads of America, along with some of the Chino slaves. Okay. Then it says, thou shalt plant a vineyard and shall not gather the grapes thereof. How many vineyards, how many plantations did the children of Israel work throughout the ages through the global slave trade? And they were not able to produce financial success, just like we just read. It says, he said the town, meaning it wasn't just the mayor that was involved individually, but the entire town stole this. The entire town of Manhattan Beach stole it from them because of the color of their skin. It destroyed them financially. So this proves the Bible to be a true book. So now the last article we're going to look into for this discussion will be the recent sentencing that happened to the singer and artist known as R. Kelly. The singer and artist known as R. Kelly, who has faced tremendous opposition due to the fact that he could not control himself. In the past, there has been several situations where Black men get caught up in foolishness and folly. So we're going to get into that in just a moment. Let's go ahead and play this clip. Alrighty, listen close.
Moments ago, R. Kelly was sentenced to 30 years in prison. This is a significant outcome for all victims of R. Kelly, and especially for the survivors who so bravely testified about the horrific and sadistic abuse they endured. R. Kelly is a predator, and as a result of our prosecution, he'll serve a long jail sentence for his crimes. With the aid of his fame, his money, and most importantly, his inner circle, R. Kelly preyed upon children and young women for his own sexual gratification for decades. He used coercive control, exemplified by a pattern of isolation, rules, dependence, threats, intimidation tactics, physical abuse, and at least once, the presence of a gun, to force victims, including minors, to engage in sexual activity with him and others, and to become unwilling participants in the pornographic films he wrote, produced, and directed. He continued committing his crimes for almost 30 years and avoided punishment until today. Today, the sentence shows that the witnesses reclaim control over their lives and over their futures. These are voices of mostly Black and brown women and children that were heard and believed, and for whom justice was finally achieved. This is a victory for them, for justice, and for future survivors of sexual assault. Victims of sexual violence must be heard, perpetrators must be held accountable, and our women and children must be protected. I hope this sentencing serves as its own testimony that it doesn't matter how powerful, rich, or famous your abuser may be, or how small they may make you feel, justice only hears the truth.
Mr. Kelly is fine. We are excited for this appeal that we are bringing. Obviously, you know, it was a hard day. He's been sentenced to a serious sentence, but we are confident in our arguments that we raised in our post-trial motions, that although they didn't persuade the district court judge, that they will persuade the Court of Appeals. We've always believed in those arguments, and we believe that this enterprise was overcharged and that the Second Circuit Court of Appeals will see it that way.
All right, there you have it. That was the article that showed you that he was sentenced to 30 years in prison due to the atrocious acts that he had committed. You see, folks, you can't get away from the Bible. The generational curses will follow you if you're in the midst of sin, iniquity, and evil. The scriptures clearly tell us in Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 25, that if a man find a betrothed damsel in the field, and the man force her, this is rape in the Bible, if a man force himself on a woman and lie with her, then the man only that lay with her shall die. So he actually got a lighter sentence than what's actually written in the scriptures. So we forewarn our brothers to not get caught up with foolish and hurtful lusts, because these foolish and hurtful lusts will lead you into damaging yourself, your life, and your people all around you. Okay? So thank you so much for listening to the Forefront Radio. I'm your host, Alfio Levi Israel. Please subscribe, please comment, provide your feedback on this current situation. Thoughts and prayers to those that were impacted by the situation that happened with this individual, and peace and blessings to the 12 tribes of Israel.
You are now listening to the Forefront Radio, where we discuss history, the Bible, the history of the Israelites, science, and other matters. Bring it out. The history of the Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans as it relates to the Bible. Who were you prior to slavery? Who were you prior to colonization? These answers and more can be seen and heard as you listen to the Forefront Radio. Hey, my friend. You have just listened to the Forefront Radio. Please leave your comment and input about the show, what you like about the show, as well as any general feedback on ways to improve. We need your help to acquire new equipment to implement studio quality video and audio to our friends. Contribute as little as $4.99. It's only worth a cup of coffee. Then we can produce documentaries, more episodes, and great info for the diaspora. Go to Cash App and enter APHIELLEVI to donate to the Forefront Radio to cover our advertising costs and reach more people. Catch our next episode on YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, Anchor.fm/The Forefront. Always remember, the truth shall liberate the mind. Peace to the heirs of promise and the heritage of the scattered 12 tribes.